Today we're going to be talking about hatchets for survival. And no, it is not just a book. Okay, so the object of finding good survival tools or a potential one-tool option for survival has, I think, always been something that has intrigued survivalists and bushcrafters for quite some time. And while I don't necessarily think there's any perfect option, today we're going to be talking about the hatchet and why I think it is at least a pretty valuable option if you decide to go down this route. Now, in the past, I have talked about and will still retain the thought that if you were to choose, or if you could only have one tool for survival, it would probably be a good, sturdy, heavy-headed tomahawk. And I think the reason why is because it has a lot of the pros that we're about to go over, but with the additional pros that the handle can be removed and replaced. And when you are able to remove the handle, that allows you to use the tomahawk in a little bit better fashion for close and detailed work, as well as using it as a semi-form of splitting wedge if necessary. And in addition, of course, having the ability or the capacity to replace or repair a handle should it break or crack is a very nice thing. And those two functions are simply due to the way a hatchet is hafted or hung on its head, or on its handle I should say, is just not a realistic capacity. Without any further ado though, let's jump into hatchets and why I like them for survival. So the primary thing that we have to keep in mind when it comes to survival is that there's about 4 key or maybe 5 key aspects that you want to focus on with survival. Those being shelter, or those being fire, shelter, water, and food acquisition. And of course, signaling for rescue. The entire purpose for a survival situation is to hopefully get out alive. That's why we prepare and train. But what the hatchet allows you to do over something like a knife is it gives you a greater ability to build fires or to build shelters and to process wood for fire. Of course, a knife will be able to baton, and that will give it some allowances, as I've mentioned in other videos, to give it some of the same abilities as a hatchet. But of course, a hatchet does not have to be batoned, and anytime you have to baton a knife, it's a considerably higher energy load or calorie expenditure as opposed to just merely swinging a hatchet. So when we consider the necessary functions and purposes of if we focus on the necessary points or the needs of a survivalist or someone who is in a survival situation, you'll see that the hatchet does a pretty good job of, like I said, being able to fell trees for shelter building, or be able to process buck wood, fell smaller trees, and like I showed in this video, knocking down high and dry dead limbs off of things like spruce trees for tinder. And this is a really good way of gathering good, solid, hot and fast burning tinder for starting a fire. And like I said, a hatchet can do this with great ease. In addition, it can also get you your trees that you need to build a roughed out shelter, in my opinion, easier than something like a knife. Even a larger knife can't function at the same level as a hatchet, and I have also videos detailing hatchets versus big knives and other tools, and the hatchet does a pretty good job. Now, of course, an axe would be even better, but the next part that makes a hatchet good for survival is the fact that it's reasonably small. And in this video, maybe it's not a very good illustration, but hopefully the roll-in footage shows that this little Holtzbrook is only about a 16-inch handle. And while obviously not as small as something like a neck knife or something like an Essie Azula, this hatchet is still reasonably easy to pack in and pack out. You're not going to notice the weight extremely, unless you're maybe an ultralight kind of guy. You're not really going to notice the weight, and like I said, it's not going to take up that much room in a backpack. And that is what I find really attractive about the hatchet, because a knife is still even easier to carry than an axe or a hatchet, but the hatchet is not that hard to carry, and I find myself really being able to accommodate a hatchet quite frequently when I go out into the woods, kind of hence why I'm able to add a lot of roll-in footage with the hatchet, is because I'm either able to throw it on a belt loop or throw it in a backpack and forget about it, and it's just there when I need it. And it's just simply put a really easy tool to pack in. In addition to this, as I've mentioned in many other videos talking about hatchets, the hatchet is also a great tool for natural resource acquisition. So if you are out and you do need to acquire things such as, different funguses to eat off of things like trees, you will be able to do that with reasonable ease, and the hatchet can actually extend your reach as opposed to having, once again, just a knife where, your reach with that bladed tool is maybe a few inches more than your natural reach. The hatchet here, especially like the 16-inch one, extends your bladed reach up to a little more than a foot. So if you're already, like myself, 6 foot, now you can reach 7 feet up on a tree and still get and acquire things if you need them. That also does play a role into tinder and getting, resources for fire starting. So that is some of the advantages of the hatchet. Now, once again, it's not the smallest tool, and a knife, even a larger knife such as a Chris Reeve Knives Pacific, will still come in at an overall length shorter than this hatchet. However, like I said, it's a lot shorter than an axe, and honestly, the versatility and usefulness that you get out of a hatchet is still there. I don't think it's as good at feather sticking as something like a tomahawk or, of course, a knife, but as I've shown in this video, it can still be done with reasonable ease, and you can, within reasonable ease, get, enough feathers to start a fire. You can also baton hatchets, just like a knife, to get through in toothpick wood if you need to do that, and it'll still work for you well. The largest downside I see to a hatchet is that most hatchets are not very good at being ferro rod or fire steel strikers. They're just not that great at it. Now, if you do find one that is, that's great, but things like this Holtzbruch Almike here is, aside from the sharpened edge, not the best tool at striking a ferro rod, but that can be worked around. So lastly, the nice thing about a hatchet, being that it is more of a striking implement and less of a cutting implement, is the edge retention. In survival situations, you may or may not be able to properly sharpen your tools, and with hatchets, while a sharper edge is always better, and to an extent, a sharper edge is safer because you're less likely to get a glancing blow with a sharp edge because it wants to bite instead of bounce. But in extreme situations, you can use hatchets, as a striking implement to break and cut wood even after that edge is not at its prime. Whereas with knives, being that they are more of a cutting implement and less of a striking implement, it's very keen that you keep a sharp edge on your tool. So those are some of the pros and some of the cons of the hatchet for a survival situation. Would I carry this over a knife? Probably, especially if I had only one tool. In my opinion, I think one of the best survival setups, if I was allowed to pick anything I wanted, would probably be something like this Holtzbruch Almike and a Baco Laplander that allows me to efficiently process wood into small bite-sized bits, and at the same time I can efficiently limb trees. I have a whole video of where I did just an overnighter without a shelter and in that video all the firewood, everything came from me using the Holtzbruch Almike, and in addition to that, the Baco Laplander. So I know that force, or those two as a force, can do or get a lot of work done. And so I would say that this is definitely a better survival tool than a knife, especially, like I said, if you could pair it with something like a small saw. It doesn't have to be anything crazy, but those two together make a really good team. And yeah, that's basically all I have to say about using a hatchet for a survival tool. I think it's great on its own, but it's really truly best, and it shines when it has something like a small saw to be paired with it. And I do think that its performance, even alone, can certainly outperform a survival knife.